Here we go. I am Sujarajan. I head the AI lab for Criteo, and today I want to talk to you about some of the work that we have been doing, and in particular, I kind of want to show you how taking into account the journey that a user makes towards buying products, modeling that sort of a journey would give us a lot more richer signal in making relevant and personalized recommendations than if we were to treat these as independent events. To set the context, why do we at Criteo care about this particular problem? So for those of you who are not aware of Criteo, we are an online advertising platform. We partner with close to 18,000 retailers to improve the engagement that they get from their shoppers. And we do this because we are able to work alongside 10,000 plus publishers to be able to show online ads on behalf of our advertisers, and hopefully these ads are relevant and personalized to the 1.4 billion users that we get to see. Now, in order to get a sense of the scale at which we operate, it's useful to look at a few reference numbers. So you can think of an ad opportunity as being the number of times somebody interacts with the platform, right? So if you think about Facebook, a good measure is the number of comments that get generated in a day, close to 166 million, 500 million tweets per day. Google gets close to 3.5 billion searches a day. Now, Criteo, just in terms of the number of ad display requests, meaning here is an opportunity to show an ad, is close to 200 billion bid requests a day. But of course, not all bid requests are equally relevant. Maybe there is some cases where we are not able to show anything that is meaningful to a particular customer, or maybe we feel that it is not a good opportunity. So the actual number of ads that we end up personalizing is 3.5 billion. Now, what I want to do with all of you is to get you through a thought experiments of sorts. How are you going to figure out which particular product you want to show for any of these display requests that show up? The scale that we are talking about is 3.5 billion, right? So let's maybe scope down the problem. Let's say we are only talking about US, so you're not trying to understand the whole global base of your users. But even in the US, there are 215 million online shoppers at any given point, right? So let's make it even simpler. I'm not going to talk about all of the 215 million users. Let's talk about a particular shopping bag. At this stage, I kind of want to make sure that that you guys understand that the data that we work with are completely anonymized. We are fully GDPR compliant. So the way you want to think about this is it is a random sample from a huge population, and it's very hard for us to figure out, hey, it is this particular user who lives in this location, and I want to depersonalize it in that sense. So here is a thought experiment. Here is a shopping bag for a user, and what I can give you is some examples. Here are some of the products that this user has looked at. Now, we as humans are able to look at this set of products and make some inferences, right? So I can show you even more, and believe it or not, this is not even the number of products that the user has possibly looked at in the past 2 months. It's literally within a week, right? So if this is the case, now, the question that we are trying to pose to our machine learning and AI models is what would be the next product that we can recommend to our users that is relevant and personalized to them. So how do typical machine learning models work? Okay, as humans, you can make some, you get some ideas about it. But obviously, the sorts of things that you're looking at is, hey, looking at the products, what do I understand? And this is what we call this is what we want to do. By looking at the set of products in aggregate, we want to draw some inferences about what is it that the user is interested in. Now, how do you get a machine to do that? The first thing you need to do is represent these products into a space on which we can act. So what does this mean? You can think of these as attributes or some sort of features that are associated with these products. As an example, if we were to take this particular jacket, we get some amount of catalog information from our partners, right? But for the most part, we also rely on some attributes that we infer for ourselves. For example, here is the color, whether that jacket has any print, what is the category that is associated with it, and so on and so forth. And this is just one instance. But imagine it was not a jacket. There was a fridge in that particular user's browsing history as well. So in this case, the sort of attributes that you have to look at are very, very different. And here I kind of want to drive home the fact that trying to extract the right attributes for the right products in itself is a challenging problem. So one of the things that we invest very heavily in is how can we come up with a unified product catalog, so we are able to sort of make sense of the product space overall, right? So the SKU ID from a particular retailer could be very different from that of the other, but the attributes help us cast it into some common space. Now that you have this sort of a normalized space, the next thing that you can do is, given all of the products that this particular user has looked at, now if you were to look at segments of these different products, you can see that some characteristics possibly stand out. Again, this is a cartoon explanation of what really happens in a machine learning model. But at the crux of it, what a model tries to do is tries to figure out what attributes matter to a particular user, given what we have observed of the past. And as you can see, it sort of seems intuitive that given this user's interest in buying jackets, and there are some attributes that seem to matter for this particular user, that it needs to be machine washable, it needs to be within a certain price range, it sort of starts coming out. Okay? So the next thing that you can think, just to summarize, we had the whole set of products. We zoomed in on a particular category from which we were able to extract certain specific attributes that matters to this user. And now that you have what you can call weights on top of these attributes, you're literally, and these weights are not generated by hand, these are generated by models, of course. You're then able to look at the catalog of a particular retailer and say, hey, let me extract something which matches these attributes the best. So it's not the leggings, but it's actually a jacket that the user is looking for. With me so far? Okay, so the classes of models which do these are typically called linear models, but as you can see, it literally is just taking items and trying to figure out what makes sense of it in aggregate. Another version of machine learned models that you might have seen in practice these days is what we call the collaborative filtering style models. And in these cases, it's literally to say, hey, users who bought this also bought these other items. And as you can see, it's not enough for us to have one particular user's history, right? Obviously, you cannot extrapolate. It's literally having to learn from the aggregate data where these sorts of models become interesting, right? You need to know that enough users have looked at pairs of these different items. This is what we call data support for the models that we build. So how do we get this data support? You don't learn from a particular shopper's data. You need to literally scale up all of the models that you use. And this is where, given the 1.4 billion users that we are able to observe, we are able to build machine learning models that are learning on aggregate and not necessarily overfitting to what we see in a particular user's history. Now let's take it a little further, right? So we started with a very simplistic model. We said, hey, we were able to observe that the user is interested in jackets, and we are predicting that there is possibly an interest to purchase a jacket. Now this didn't make use of much information of sorts, but what if I were to give you the timeline of the user's browsing behavior, right? So besides the interest in jackets, here are some of the other items that the user is interested in. Now, immediately some things can sort of come to light. You might be able to say, hey, the user possibly, again, in aggregate data, we are able to figure out that jackets are possibly very interesting for purchase around the month of August. Things like toddler beds are possibly are not necessarily based on any seasonality. It's agnostic to the month in which it gets purchased. But what would be really cool is now to say that given the trajectory of how these purchases are proceeding forward, can we predict what is going to be the next purchase that the user makes, right? In this sense, if you were to think of, hey, there is an evolution of the purchases where it used to be jackets, it's got to toddler beds, and it's highly likely that it could be a toddler lunch bag that is going to be purchased next, right? And what would be even more cool is if we could personalize even that particular aspect of it. Now, look at this in its entirety. So that kind of made sense because I handpicked some of these products to illustrate a particular point. But you want to learn this from a mishmash of many different products that a typical user might browse, right? Not all of us sit down and say, hey, today I'm going to just focus on things that I want to buy for my toddler kid. And therefore, you have a very neat data set, right? Sometimes you're looking for things for your house. Sometimes you're trying to buy things for yourself and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, given these huge sequences of products, how do we predict the next one that we want to buy? Now, there are several things that you can extract from a timeline that you can possibly make use of. As an example, what is the difference in, what is the time gap between the different interactions that you do? what was the first time that a user looked at a product versus when did they end up buying that. Now, if you were to extrapolate this to learn from many users, now you start getting signals in terms of what is the time gap that matters. Similarly, you start learning things like, is there a particular seasonality to some of the purchases? Can that be worked into the different models? As an example, if you want to say some purchases are possibly annual purchases, right? So around birthdays or around vacation times, there are some purchases that seem like outlier purchases, but looked at its entirety sort of makes sense. Now, are we going to be able to extract these sorts of information? It kind of sounds obvious because I'm saying it, but how do you get a machine learning model to learn these sorts of features and rules for itself? And recently, there has been a class of AI models which are called recurrent neural networks. And to give you a gist of where this was inspired from, it typically comes from the way humans speak. So if I were to say something like, the clouds are up in the blank and fill in the blank, most of us are going to say in the sky, right? Because we kind of have learned over and over time that the clouds are up in the sky. So you learn from many sentences to say, okay, here is the next word that I expect to see. But it's not as easy. Sometimes you need to make it personalized as well, where you want to say, maybe the way I use certain words are very different from the way you use certain words. But overall, given enough samples of some purchases, you can learn some aggregate behavior to say, to predict the next word, and in our case, the next product that appears in sequence. Okay? And at the same time, given enough data about an individual user, we are able to learn what are the preferences for this user. And this is where the universal catalog features that I was talking about, in terms of, hey, is this for a particular gender? Is it for a particular type of material? And this becomes personalized to this user. So that's where the second attribute or the characteristics come into play and the personalization happens. So we literally took sequences of the user interactions, so not just purchases, items that were viewed, items that were searched on, and items that were purchased eventually, to build what we call user timelines. And the task we are setting up for our recurrent neural networks is to predict what is the next action that is going to happen. And I can refer you guys to this paper which was published almost a year back now, where the task was to predict the next purchase that this user is going to make, right? And the cool thing was we were able to even predict that item that the user had never even viewed before. So it's literally predicting into the future. Okay? So I would kind of like to wrap up with three main thoughts. Advertising gets a lot of bad rap because there are a lot of very irrelevant and sometimes annoying ads. And I think as a whole, we need to do better. True example, a friend of mine, for whatever reasons, clicked on a pallet of paper, and a pallet of paper ad was following him for a very long time. And obviously, yes, ads are junk, ha ha ha, good laugh. But if we were to look at the sequence of the interactions that a particular user had made, as an example, maybe office supplies stands out as an outlier because this particular friend is not interested in office supplies at all. But imagine that you are an office assistant and buying office supplies is a thing that you do. But by looking at things in context, we are able to glean out noise from actual interest way better. Okay? So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing is, of course, the refrigerator problem, right? Ad fatigue is real. Of course, when a user wants to buy a refrigerator, everybody wants to bid on this user because it's a high-ticket item. So the user is followed around by these ads for a very long time, even after they buy a refrigerator. Now, the real question is, given that we are looking at the sequence data, we are able to infer things of the sorts that maybe 2 months after the first view of a refrigerator, it's highly likely that the user has ended up purchasing one. Right? Most of us would agree that nobody is going to be refrigerator shopping forever. You probably want to just get done with it. Even 2 months is a stretch. 5 days is probably the average that we tend to see, and that's what the data tells us. But we are able to glean these sorts of rules to say, given that sequence, given the views has happened, the probability of another refrigerator view or an interest in purchase happening so far down has come really low. So we should stop showing these ads to these users. The last part, which I totally believe in, and so does everybody at Criteo, is we really need to be optimizing for incrementality. Now, showing somebody who already is going to buy diaper ads. More diaper ads is literally wastage of ad dollars, because the user is not going to buy anything more, right? This is already in their shopping cart. This is something that is just going to happen reflexively. So this is not additional sales or additional interest that you're going to get from the user. You'd rather want to help the user discover and uncover other products that they possibly are not already in the market for. So how do we set up our models to optimize for the incremental sales, right? Not exactly for the reflexive purchases, but for the things that they would not have bought otherwise, and also measure towards that is an incredibly challenging problem. But with the ability to look at sequential data, we are able to make more progress towards these sorts of things. Okay? With those three thoughts, I guess I'll end my talk and I'll take questions.
Thank you very much. So don't forget to use Slido. You just drop down to track 2 and type your questions in. We also have a roving microphone around. Anybody got a question they'd like to ask on that session? It's very useful for me. I now understand why I'm being followed on my computer around by adverts for freezers. Sorry, this is a new world to me, so... Has anybody question?
Well, hopefully it's not a Criteo ad, and if it is, you should send me an email.
But also, presumably, as this process refines and refines, it should get more and more accurate in those kind of...
Exactly right. I believe the vision for ads is it literally needs to be a shopping assistant where it helps you discover new products that you actually want to purchase, and not necessarily keep showing ads for things that you already are in the market for, in some sense. And that, for us, is the holy grail that I think the ad industry as a whole needs to get to.
And do you think all companies understand how annoying it is when you do get an advert following you around?
We do.
So hopefully it will get more and more refined. Thank you very much indeed.
Sure,
Great
thanks.
presentation.